Heyo, there you
Hi
are.
there.
How's it going?
Very good. I'm so glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, I don't know if you saw the last talk, but it was very informal, and it's gonna be, it's gonna be,
It's hard to
e-
follow. It
no,
was fun. It put a smile on my face and it scared me straight.
exactly. That's it. So I went a little over on the timing with Joe, just talking about the implications of ChatGPT and their hallucinations. So now I am going to just hand it over to you. Get started. I'll see you in like 25 minutes. And feel free, everyone, to drop some questions in the chat so that I can ask Susan when she's done with the presentation. All right, Susan, it's all yours.
Thanks, Demetrios. Well, hi, everyone. Like Demetrios said, my name is Susan Jensen, and I'm an analytics engineer at Great Expectations. And I've been working in software and analytics for about 15 years. And next slide, please. So I'm very appreciative to Big Eye and Great Expectations for the chance to talk to you today about my perspective on data quality, which is informed by my own experience, reading and talking with lots of people over the years. In particular, the book, The Courage to be Disliked. In that book, Dr. Alfred Adler was paraphrased as saying, all problems are interpersonal relationship problems. And that has always just really stuck with me. And it provided for me a very interesting framework for thinking about data engineering work as well. So I hope that you will find this exploration interesting and have some relevance for you. And it's hopefully good food for thought. Next slide. So before I get started, I want everyone to meet Pip. So Pip is the main character from the book, the book Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. And Pip is sort of an unofficial mascot for our team at Great Expectations. So you might see him pop up sometimes in various disguises during this talk. So I view data sort of like watching a movie. I'm full of uncertainty about what's going to happen next. And yet I also sometimes have a pretty good guess of what's coming next, some assumptions about what's been happening, and some reasonable suppositions about where it's going. So with data, just like with a movie, I have to remember that every moment is affected by someone's choice. Decisions are always being made about how data are generated or collected or interpreted, just like a director making decisions about every detail that you see in a movie. Next slide, please. So when we have problems with our data, that means that something is preventing the data from being valuable or decreasing its value. But how do we go about defining exactly what's bad or what went wrong? That seems obvious, but data quality, good or bad, is actually pretty subjective. Just like the intention or the shape of the data is decided by someone well before we see it, just like a director making a movie, we need to judge it as we see it. Well, the same with data quality. Depending on our background, outlook, or goals, we might see potential value in the data that someone else just can't see. Or maybe we've judged something about the data doesn't look right, but just like a movie, someone else might see it completely differently and might not see a data quality problem at all. Next slide. And so a data quality problem, meaning something doesn't look right, is suddenly also sort of nebulous and subjective. And that's because we can't say we have a problem without considering what the problem is for whom. We can't agree on what's a problem until we have agreement on what's valuable. So just like the data are the artifact of decisions and forks in the road, data quality is also a decision, a judgment about the state or the utility or even like the truthiness of your data. So for example, if the data are missing, but no one is actually using it, do you have a data quality problem? Well, you might say yes, because it's unnecessarily increasing the complexity of the schema. But then you might ask, okay, well, is increasing complexity of the schema a problem? Well, again, it kind of depends on how you look at it. For some people, that's just not a problem. Next slide. So why can't we all just agree on the value of the data so that we can agree on the definition and severity of data quality problems? Well, this might be like asking a theater full of 100 different moviegoers to each write an assessment of the movie that they just saw. It might be the case that moviegoers cannot avoid adding their own interpretation or opinions. They may have understood something beyond the scope of what you were thinking, or they might have completely missed the boat, according to you. In any case, you will get 100 at least slightly different answers, and the point is that none of them are wrong, because people can't help but use their whole brain if they've been paying attention to the movie at all. And if you did want everyone in perfect agreement, 100 identical answers about the movie, then why did you even ask them that question in the first place? Next slide. Okay, so it makes sense that we're all unique human brains that are learning and processing data our own way, and we can't all quite agree on the definition of valuable data or data quality problems all the time. So let's just stay tactical for a moment. What problems exactly are we having that are clearly caused by our poor data quality? Well, here's a list, problems I've seen attributed to poor data quality, generally degradation of both product and team. Too much time spent on data munging, deploy and product launch delays, broken apps and dashboards, too much manual report generation, team disagreement about metrics, missing erroneous data, business decisions made on erroneous data, etc. But let's just stop for a second. If poor data quality somehow just stopped and all of our data were sparkly and perfect, according to everyone, hypothetically, would all of these things listed above really stop? Next slide. So, is it also possible, maybe, that data quality is a target that we think we can hit, something we think we can fix, and then we hope all the things will get better? So instead of focusing on treating poor data quality as the cause of the degradation of product and team, we could just try turning it around, and maybe poor data quality is actually a symptom, just like our broken dashboards and our siloed data, a symptom of something else. Next slide. Well, what's something else? Well, let's look at a real example. Names and details have been changed of tackling a data quality problem. We'll pretend that Ajay here, and I hope that put a smile on your face, is one of our coworkers, and we will tell you that this is Ajay's story. Next slide. So in Ajay's story, let's set the scene. So we work for a company that has a mobile and a web app. User data is sent from our apps to a vendor for purposes of attributing user activity to vendor ad placement, for example. The attribution data are then sent from the vendor back to us, where it is combined with other internal data sources. So that's our setup. Next slide. So sort of the prologue is now a new desired attribute is being emitted in the data, some of the time from some of the apps, and one of our resulting reports is not okay. Ajay sees that our new attribute data look bogus. Next slide. So now let's enter the actors. Ajay noticed the bogus data, suspects it is the data going from the app to the vendor, and asked his product manager. The product manager referred Ajay to another product manager for the app itself. She referred Ajay to the engineering manager responsible for the app's data flow. The engineering managers explained to Ajay how the app and the data flow all work, which Ajay actually already knew. So Ajay asked the engineering manager's direct report, another data engineer, who it turns out had already found the same problem and hadn't resolved it either. So that data engineer suspects it's the vendor's fault and not a problem with the app. Ajay then asked his own engineering manager about it, who said it was not a critical issue. And Ajay could not actually ask the creator of the app because that person no longer works here. Okay, next slide. So what just happened? Well, multiple people said, in effect, ask someone else, I don't know. You have to ask around here to get your work done. Nothing is written down. But please stop asking me, I don't know. I don't need to know how this works or need to know if it's solved. It's probably the vendor's fault. This isn't critical. We don't need to solve it. There are hotter fires burning right now. But nobody said or asked, okay, well, here's what we do next. Or, hey, AJ, did you get your question answered? Or did it get solved? So in the end, AJ felt like he didn't do a good job explaining to people that the data are bogus. He doesn't understand why. If anyone did understand the data are bogus, then why it's not a dire issue. He feels like he's not in the in-group of people with the right folk knowledge. He's afraid of seeming like a jerk or telling people how to do their jobs. He gets subtly talked down to and criticized for overreaching. He is discouraged for trying to understand the bigger picture, which is just too difficult. He is supposed to ask around instead of learning and actually understanding things. He feels like he doesn't have the social capital to question people outside his immediate team. And when he gets sent around to ask the right people, with his questions, he's intruding on people's turf. He doesn't know what he's going to do. He's actually kind of just waiting for the other shoe to drop because he still has bogus data within his turf. Basically, AJ feels alone. Next slide. So what's going on here? Well, poor AJ. But this isn't about making AJ feel better. That's AJ's task. Instead, actually, this isn't about finding out who was wrong or who made mistakes, because in fact, no one here was wrong. Everyone was doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing. And the point of this story is, every time it's a negotiation, working with stakeholders or even your own peers. In other words, what does AJ think is his task? And what do others think that AJ's task is? What does AJ think he can get from the others? And what do the others think they are responsible for to AJ? And so on. Next slide. So AJ is not successfully negotiating. And somehow we're not really talking about data quality anymore. So what is AJ supposed to be doing here? What is his role? Well, if we look at data engineering job descriptions these days, there's a big focus on building things, Airflow, Python, Spark, a big focus on moving fast. There's a focus on tooling, but no data governance. Or data governance, frankly, at a course level, only access and security and not data reliability. There's no higher level tasks in the job description, just a higher level skill set required of working with other people. So when he gets to the job, there's an overwhelming amount of tech debt in data engineering, missing data governance processes, like I just mentioned, an abundance of folk knowledge, dealing with deprecations by external systems and vendors. I've even heard it called vendor ops. So most of us can accomplish goals only by working with others. And that was always part of what AJ was going to have to do, for sure. Data engineers can work with dozens of different people. But AJ is kind of alone in having to figure this one out, this data quality problem, because it's all about his interpersonal relationships within the organization. Next slide. So we've looked at it from AJ's perspective, but you can also see by each person's reaction to AJ that this issue is basically tripping along in a pretty haphazard fashion. The fact is that data quality, which AJ is highly focused on, is just one aspect of data governance, which also includes integrity, security, and usability. Data governance should be mission critical for everybody. But in AJ's case, nobody has time to understand the problem, or if they do understand it, actually explain it to AJ. Nobody has time to fix it. So why on earth, if no one is going to debug it or fix it, why would anybody take the time to monitor for it or plan for it? And that is probably where AJ is headed. Why should he care if no one else does? Next slide. So we can imagine where the principles of data reliability engineering are missing here, or where they could have helped with AJ's problem. So first of all, embracing risk. AJ definitely acknowledges the risk of users downstream from him having a problem with the new attribute data, but he has no plan for what to tell them. There's also the risk that this is going to happen again with a different data attribute. He looks to the organization for a plan, but there's none shared with him at least. If the organization has embraced risk, how does that translate into risk management within AJ's role? Without a plan, His plan in the future may be to just kick the can down the road as others before him have done, frankly. Okay, next slide. Set standards. Ajay has his own data quality standards, apparently not widely shared by the rest of the team. Ajay is not even on the same page as his own manager. Ajay sees risk, in other words, what to tell his downstream data users, which seems like a hot fire to him, where his manager does not see risk. His manager says, this is not a hot fire. So if there was kind of a shared value system that came down from above for Ajay and his manager both, could it resolve the question of whether this is actually the hottest fire right now? Next slide. Reducing toil and using automation. Well, Ajay and the other data engineer accidentally and independently found the same problem. And now they are both definitely toiling to debug and resolve it, but they're toiling really in interpersonal communications. And Ajay is starting to believe he is toiling for nothing. So if Ajay does stop toiling on this issue, will it just be resurfaced again by someone else and everything will start all over again? Next slide. Monitor everything. Monitoring may have raised alerts for Ajay and the other data engineer, but their only next step is to commence down a murky trail of responsibility. Murky in both who owns what and where the cause might lay. With murkiness leading only to dead ends and no team support, what is monitoring even really for? We have to think it through. Okay, next slide. Controlling releases. So somewhere between the originating app and the results consoles, the data began to not match the expected schema. So any number of changes could have occurred within that pipeline, but it's not clear where the erroneous data began. The data aren't usable or discoverable even by the data engineers at this company. So it's not clear which release to actually roll back to. Next slide. And maintaining simplicity. The system is so complicated and without documentation that no one has a big picture of how it works, except maybe Ajay's boss, who's the most overburdened of them all, who explicitly told Ajay, don't worry about the big picture. So the pipeline is complicated, but not unnecessarily so. The complicated part is understanding what the expected results of the new attribute are. And this is where Ajay and the rest of the organization are really clashing. Next slide. So let's try to imagine an ending to Ajay's story if our company instead did function with the best practices of data reliability engineering. So for example, Ajay might see, in fact, his data quality problem is not really a problem after all. Next slide. He realizes, data quality standards come down from the business. This isn't my call. Or he might realize that actually it's not my job. I'm not accountable for this piece of the pipeline, but I've notified those who are. Good. And he's ready to explain that same thing to his own downstream users. So these are actually perfectly reasonable statements in which Ajay is complying with best governance practices. Basically, there are set standards, there are designated people who are accountable, and Ajay is recognizing that. Next slide. But Ajay still has some nagging concerns. From the company's perspective, his approach might be right on. His alignment with the company and data governance policies are perfect, but basically Ajay feels dissatisfied. He'd still like to understand what's going on and be able to help resolve it. Next slide. So let's do the alternate ending, a second ending to Ajay's story, again, in which the company is following data governance best practices. Okay, next slide. Ajay says, data are fully available and discoverable, and I have found the source of the problem. I've set up automated monitoring and validation so problems can be caught earlier in the pipeline before they get to me. So now Ajay's dream has come true. Thanks to improved discoverability and documentation or metadata, he was able to track down the source of the problem. Super. Next slide. Why are they looking at me like that? He asks. Because this situation requires more cross-team collaboration and communication than ever. Next slide. AJ's concerns about his team and how they perceive him, they remain. How does he fit in? He wonders, am I invading someone else's turf? Or no one else seems to work like I do. Should I keep what I learned to myself? Or, well, what about next time? AJ still has no plan for coping with the risk that he'll have to do this all again. So data governance, like other business functions, requires people to cooperate. AJ's best work might be for naught if he's acting like a lone wolf. In this case, he has achieved his own goals, resolving the data quality bug, but without consideration of what other people are trying to do. Little complex. Next slide. So it was easy to imagine applying the principles of data reliability engineering, and that was great because AJ made good progress with both of those possible engineering conclusions to the story. Sure. Next slide. But AJ still has a problem. In both of those cases, AJ still has questions and doubts about the data quality itself because he sees it differently from other people. He isn't sure how to reconcile his views with other people's about the value of the data and what's wrong with it. Remember from the beginning of the slides, Casablanca and Rotten Tomatoes? And he isn't sure how to work with his team. Remember, he's just not doing a good job of negotiating. So it feels kind of clear by now that the truly larger problem, larger than data quality itself, is a bit of the dysfunctional working relationships in AJ's company. Next slide. AJ and everyone else in his story, they aren't doing anything wrong. They're doing what they've been taught to do, which is this prevailing system of management. Please the boss, break the problem into small steps, and work on manageable tasks, which sounds reasonable. But it's the prevailing system of management, the organization itself, which is the underlying cause of the data quality problem and the source of AJ's distress. Because the organization asks, what stages of the data lifecycle do you control? But people downstream from AJ are going to point to him. Why is the data bogus? He sees that it's bigger than his part of the data lifecycle. The organization asks, well, what are your tasks? What are your components of the problem? And AJ hears that as, AJ, stick to your role and don't overreach. And the org says, if who you work with is outside the realm of your control, AJ, well, you need to work with them. And in AJ's case, that was everybody. And he tried to negotiate and persuade, and nobody liked it. Next slide. So this system encourages AJ and each of us to be the center of his own universe, sticking to his tasks in order to get his reward. That may mean working together or with each other, but we're each still working to achieve our own objectives. The problem is nobody's got the big picture. No one realizes that they are, all of them, watching the same movie, just at different speeds or in different languages, with their own unique worldview, their own unique perspective. Next slide. But orgs work the way they do, not just because of management, but because of how we work, how we think and interact with each other. So this is an idea from systems thinking, from Peter Senji's book, The Fifth Discipline. You and your so-called enemy are part of a single system, and the cure lies in your relationship with your so-called enemy. So AJ can absorb this right now without waiting for a change or a message from up high in the organization. AJ feels alone, but he needs to realize he's part of the same system as the vendor, the clients, his manager, his coworkers, and everyone else at the org. Just like Afua said in an earlier talk, he is not alone. Next slide. So what can AJ do now? Well, Peter Senji also writes, truly being proactive means seeing how you are part of the problem. And in AJ's case, that means making the problem about himself. He is looking out from his kingdom of one. Next slide. AJ isn't putting himself in other people's shoes. He has unilaterally determined that the data are bogus and that they need to be fixed right now. Instead, he could be a little more willing to question his own beliefs. What is he so sure about? and try listening to other people. Next slide. AJ's manager simply wants to see AJ working on something higher priority or more valuable than the bogus data. AJ could try listening up and realize it takes two people to have a miscommunication. Next slide. In the absence of being able to resolve the data quality issue by himself, AJ is looking up in vain to the organization to tell him how to deal with his downstream stakeholders. The data are bogus, but it's not his fault. And basically, AJ fears being both inadequate to their questions and he fears kicking the can down the road. But instead, AJ could start acting like we're all part of the same system and start forming horizontal relationships with everyone he works with, realizing that even the terms upstream and downstream seem to imply a hierarchy that just doesn't exist. Next slide. AJ doesn't need to wait for the organization to change or for someone else to start. He can start now. And of course, the point of the story is we are all AJ, and we could all do any of these things, starting with having a little more simple awareness of what is in plain sight all around us, how we see and think about other people, and how we choose to treat people. People, not our enemies. If you change how you treat people, people will follow suit. So AJ can lead by example. Next slide. But AJ isn't the only one who needs to change. The organization needs to change too. So people need to feel that they can learn and make unique contributions of value. We don't want to squash this feeling within AJ. People need to be able to understand the big picture. In AJ's case, that means understanding what the data are supposed to accomplish, why the standards or data contracts are what they are, and how is he expected to help with that. AJ struggles with simply complying with seemingly arbitrary benchmarks. And AJ might indeed still have the finger pointed up at him from downstream. Hey, why is this data you're sending us bogus? But his downstream users would be just as encouraged as he is to understand and learn for themselves how things work and why. Just as AJ has no enemies, he is not their enemy either. There is no hierarchy. There's choices that AJ can make in how to complete his tasks and work with others. But there's a way for the organization to encourage him to do that in a really more satisfying way that respects him and everyone as a whole person. Next slide. So to paraphrase Alfred Adler in The Courage to be Disliked, there is no pure internal worry. Wherever worry may arise, there is the shadow of other people. So I see this very clearly with data quality worries, which is why I chose to talk about it today. So I am not an organizational expert or psychologist, but I am a reader, and I would like to conclude with a little comment about PIP. So as I said before, I work for a company called Great Expectations, and we actually talk about the novel Great Expectations by Charles Dickens more than you might think. So if you don't know, it's a story about Pip, a young orphan who has many adventures on his way to growing into a man. And Pip is very ambitious and had many great expectations for his future, such as improving his wealth, improving his class. But the point of the book is that it's more important how you treat people than obtaining advancement. So I think that Pip is a useful reminder of the importance of deciding for ourselves how we think about and treat people. And I know that by prioritizing meaningful interpersonal relationships myself, I've found a lot of my own problems get a little simpler as well. Next slide. So if you're interested, here are the references I used in this talk in no particular order. So I would encourage you to check them out for yourself. Thank you very much.
Wow. All right. AJ, oh my God, I feel bad for a guy. Come on, AJ.
We've all been AJ, right?
Can't buy a win. Let's be honest. That guy. Oof. All right. So I just got time for one question for you, and then I'm going to have to keep it moving. There's questions coming through in the chat, though. So if anyone wants to ask any more questions and not just talk about AJ and the dilemma that he's going through, please ask them. And Susan, I think you can jump into the chat and answer them directly in there. My question is, how does AJ's story play differently when he's at a big company versus a small company?
Oh, I think it's the same. I think that he'll have fewer people he needs to work with, less red tape, but really how you treat people, it's like living in a big city. You're still surrounded by the people that you see every day in your neighborhood. So I think that every single relationship he has, whether it's a big company or a small company, I think the same lessons would apply and same guidelines that he could follow.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Susan. This was awesome. And I can tell this wasn't your first talk. You're very professional and you put me to shame. So,
no, I have had so much fun at this conference, such a diversity of backgrounds and talks. And I've been interested in how much I've been kind of scared straight by the other talks, but also made to smile by the other talks. So hope this one did the same.
There you go. Well, thank you for coming on here. And for anybody that has questions for you, throw them in the chat.